On the day of the ceremony, the old town hall filled wall to wall. They watched the gray, muzzled dog walk in, sunlight catching his fur, and no one remembered the $1 sign anymore. Only the little girl's rule echoed, forcing everyone to rethink how they treat the fragile and the forgotten. Late afternoon light spilled over the Maple Creek Fairgrounds, turning dust in the air into a soft golden haze. Kids clutched cotton candy, country music leaked from cheap speakers, and someone burned hot dogs at a crooked grill. It looked like any small-town Saturday, loud and bright and careless, as if nothing in this place could possibly be broken. At the far end of the livestock barn, tied to a splintered post with a short length of chain, something very broken stood perfectly still. The sign wired above his head read, in faded black marker, "Retired police dog, $1." Beneath it, the dog's name was scratched in smaller letters, almost as an afterthought. Ranger. Ranger's coat should have been thick and proud, a blend of sable and tan that once turned heads on city streets. Now it lay uneven along his ribs, patches thinned around an old scar that ran from his shoulder down his side. His ears twitched at every sudden laugh, every shout, but the rest of him hardly moved, as if staying still was the only safe choice left. People drifted past the makeshift pen the way they passed a wreck on the highway. They slowed, stared, then looked away quickly, muttering half-jokes to make the heaviness in their chest disappear. A few kids dared each other to get closer, then backed off when Ranger's dark eyes flicked toward them, less angry than tired. Near the front of the pen, a folding table had been set up crooked on the dirt. Frank Melton, in a sweat-stained ball cap and plaid shirt, climbed up on a hay bale behind it and thumped a wooden gavel for attention. "All right, folks," he called, voice loud and practiced. "Last few items of the day. Let's see if anybody's got a heart, or at least $1. Two teenage boys, Kyle and Reese, leaned on the rail, phones out, recording everything. "Dude, get this," Kyle snickered quietly. $1 for a killer cop dog. I'm posting this right now." Reese zoomed in on Ranger's scar. "He looks busted," he said, not even trying to whisper. "Bet nobody touches him." Ranger heard the word killer and didn't understand all of it, but he understood the tone. He shifted his weight, chain clinking, the sound sharp in his own ears. Voices rolled over him like waves, sometimes too loud, sometimes too many, at once. He kept his eyes low, watching boots and dust, counting heartbeats without knowing he was doing it. Frank cleared his throat and slapped the sign above Ranger's head. "Now this here," he announced, "is Ranger. Used to work for the city. K-9 unit, real deal, but he's retired now, hard to handle, jumps at loud noises. Not exactly your cuddly couch pup, folks. That's why the price is what it is." A ripple of uneasy laughter skated through the crowd. A little closer to the back, a girl no taller than the rail craned her neck to see over someone's elbow. Maddie Brooks, 7 years old, shoes still dusty from the school playground, clutched a crumpled $1 bill in her fist. She'd won it last week in a school reading contest and refused to spend it on candy. Today, she wouldn't say why she'd brought it, only that she might need it. Maddie's mom, Laura, stood beside her, arms folded tight. "We're just looking," she had told her daughter on the way in, glancing at the sign listing used tools and old equipment. She hadn't planned to walk toward the back of the barn, hadn't planned to see a police dog tied up alone, staring at the floor like he'd done something unforgivable. Frank waited for the noise to settle, then lifted the gavel. "So here's the deal," he said. "He's been cleared to be sold. Paperwork's all done. No refunds, no returns. $1 starting bid. Who wants him?" He let the question hang in the dusty air, eyes scanning faces. No hands went up, boots shuffled. Someone coughed. Kyle nudged Reese and raised his phone higher. "Watch this," he whispered. "Nobody wants the hero? This is so messed up." A woman in a denim jacket pulled her little boy away from the rail when Ranger shifted again, chain scraping. "Come on, Evan," she murmured. "Don't get too close. He's been trained to attack." She said it just loud enough for Ranger to hear the edge in her voice. Ranger's gaze slid past boots and jeans and work-worn hands until it caught something small and still, a pair of sneakers with purple laces planted firmly in the dirt. Above them, skinny legs, a faded T-shirt with a cartoon sun, and a little hand holding on to a single green bill like it was something sacred. For the first time that afternoon, he lifted his head just a little higher. Maddie met his eyes. They weren't wild like she'd imagined when her classmates talked about police dogs. They were dark, rimmed with red and heavy, like he'd stayed awake too many nights in a row. For a heartbeat, the barn noise muffled around her as if someone had turned down the volume on the whole fair. It was just her and the dog and the sign above his head. "Any takers?" Frank called again, gavel poised over the table. "He's housebroken, I think. Probably remembers a few tricks. $1. That's less than the lemonade you're all sipping." A few people chuckled nervously, but nobody moved. He shrugged, about to slam the gavel and move on to the next item, chalking Ranger up as a loss. Before the wood struck the table, a small arm shot up through the crowd. The crumpled bill shook slightly in tiny fingers that refused to lower. "I do," Maddie said, her voice not loud, but steady enough to cut through the murmur. Heads turned. Laura's stomach dropped. Ranger's ears twitched, and for the first time all day, a fragile thread of attention stretched straight toward one person. For a second, no one seemed sure they'd heard her right. The barn hummed with low talk and the faint buzz of the fair outside, but around Maddie, a small circle of silence opened. Laura stared at her daughter's raised hand, the crumpled bill trembling at the edge of Maddie's reach, as if even the dollar wasn't entirely sure it belonged in this moment. "Madison, honey, put your hand down," Laura murmured, leaning in. Her fingers brushed Maddie's elbow, gentle but urgent. "We came to look, that's all. He's not a pet store puppy." The word puppy felt wrong even as she said it, glancing at Ranger's thick neck, the scars, the worn-down stance of a dog who had seen too much. From the other side of the aisle, a sharp voice sliced through. "Are you out of your mind, Laura?" Doris Mayfield, in her floral blouse and perfectly sprayed hair, pushed closer to the ring, clutching her phone. "That dog is trained to attack. They said police dog, not teddy bear. Don't let that child go near him." Her words spread through the crowd like spilled oil. Ranger flinched at the sudden rise in volume. One muscle in his shoulder jumped, chain ringing lightly against the post. He didn't step forward or back. He had been taught to hold his place unless called. But his eyes moved, tracking the direction of the harsh voice, then returning to the small, steady one that had said, "I do." Frank let out a half-laugh, half-sigh, looking between Maddie and the restless crowd. "Kid, I don't think you understand," he said, resting the gavel on the table. "This ain't a stuffed animal. He's complicated. Spooks easy. Jumps at loud noises. Folks at the station said he's more trouble than he's worth." He tossed the last line out like a joke, but it landed heavy in Ranger's chest. Maddie took one small step closer to the rail, still clutching the bill. "I understand," she said quietly. "I still want him." Her voice didn't crack, but her throat tightened around the words. Up close, she could see the faint gray around Ranger's muzzle, the way his paws pressed into the dirt as if he were bracing for something. Laura moved with her, hand now on the small of Maddie's back. "Sweetheart," she whispered, "look at his size. If he gets scared, if he reacts, you're the one who will get hurt. We don't know what he's been through." She wasn't trying to scare her daughter. She was trying to outrun a fear that had been growing since the moment she saw the sign. Maddie finally looked up at her mother, then back at Ranger. His gaze met hers again, flicked away, then crept back, like someone testing a door that had always been locked. "He's not the one who scares me," she said softly. She turned toward Frank, heart pounding. "If I give you my dollar, you have to promise something." Frank raised an eyebrow, amused despite himself. "Oh, yeah?" he said. "And what's that?" Around him, Kyle angled his phone to make sure he caught every second. Reese muttered, "This is going viral, man," under his breath, but even he had stopped smirking quite so hard. Maddie's fingers smoothed the wrinkled bill once, twice. Then she lifted her chin, looking at Frank, then at the faces around her, then at Ranger. "No one is allowed to yell at him," she said. "Ever." The word hung there, simple and stubborn. "Not if he messes up. Not if he gets scared. If I give you this dollar, that's my rule." The barn seemed to inhale all at once. A baby fussed somewhere in the back, then quieted again. Outside, a burst of laughter from the fair drifted in, oddly distant. Doris sputtered, "That's ridiculous. Dogs need discipline." But even she felt something snag at the back of her throat when Ranger's ears twitched at the word yell. Ranger didn't know what rule meant, or ever, or discipline. What he understood was tone. Laura's anxious edge, Doris's cutting pitch, Frank's practiced drawl. Then there was this new sound, small even, wrapped around his name without actually saying it. He listened to it the way a cold dog listens for the sound of a familiar engine pulling into a driveway. Laura saw the way Ranger's posture shifted. It was barely anything, just a loosening around his shoulders, a breath that went all the way out instead of stopping halfway. "Maddie?" she said, softer now. She watched her daughter, saw the set of her jaw that looked so much like her own in a mirror on the worst days. Somewhere beneath her fear, something else stirred, the memory of being a kid who believed broken things still deserved a chance. Frank looked down at the dollar in Maddie's hand, then up at the sign again. "Retired police dog, $1. He could have refused. He could have cited policy, liability, any of the words adults used when they wanted to shut a door without saying they were afraid. Instead, he rubbed a thumb over the worn handle of the gavel and exhaled slowly. "You're really sure about this, kid?" he asked. Maddie nodded once. The dollar shook between her fingers, but her eyes didn't. "I'm sure," she said. "You can keep the sign, but he's mine." For a brief, almost invisible moment, Laura's hand tightened, ready to pull her back. Then she let it rest, steady, on her daughter's shoulder, choosing to stand there instead of drag her away. The gavel came down with a dull crack that seemed too small for the moment it marked. "Sold," Frank announced, his voice quieter than before. "Sold for $1 to the little girl with one rule." Scattered laughter rose, not quite as confident as earlier. Doris shook her head, already composing a complaint in her mind. But Ranger, hearing the change in voices, only knew that something had ended, and something else, strange and fragile, had just begun. The sun had dipped lower by the time Laura's old sedan pulled away from the fairgrounds, gravel crunching under its tires. Ranger rode in the back seat, not lying down, not standing fully, just braced awkwardly between both. The scent of hay slowly gave way to hot asphalt, cut grass, and something faintly like home that he didn't recognize yet. Maddie sat beside him, seat belt cutting across her chest, one small hand resting just inches from his paw. She didn't try to hug him or grab his collar. She simply let her knuckles brush the coarse fur now and then, as if reminding both of them that this wasn't a dream someone else would wake them from. Laura kept glancing at the rearview mirror, eyes flicking between the road and the reflection of the dog taking up most of the back seat. Each time a truck roared past, Ranger's head jerked slightly, ears pricking, then flattening. He didn't growl. He just watched, muscles tight, like he was waiting for orders that never came. "Remember the rule, Mom," Maddie said quietly, breaking a long stretch of silence. No yelling. She wasn't accusing, just reminding, the way you might remind someone to turn off the stove. Laura exhaled slowly, nodding. "I remember," she said. "I'm not the one I'm worried about." Her gaze drifted toward the neighborhood they were driving into. Cedar Lane appeared around a gentle bend, lined with small houses that all looked related. Same porch rails, same narrow driveways, same patchwork lawns. As Laura turned in, a curtain twitched at the house next door. Doris Mayfield's silhouette appeared in the window, then vanished, only to reappear at her front door, phone already in hand. Laura parked and shut off the engine. The quiet after the motor cut out felt almost too loud. Ranger held his breath without meaning to. The last time an engine had stopped and a door had opened, it had led to a noisy kennel, strange handlers, and a concrete floor that never warmed up. He waited, eyes on Maddie, for a cue he understood. Maddie unbuckled, turned toward him, and spoke like she was talking to a skittish friend. "It's okay, Ranger. This is home," she said. The word meant something to her that it didn't to him, but her tone was low and even. She slid out of the car, then carefully opened his door, stepping back so he wouldn't feel cornered. He lowered himself out, one paw at a time, nails clicking on the driveway. The smells hit him at once. Old oil, a neighbor's barbecue, the faint trail of a cat long gone, and somewhere under it all, the soft, hopeful scent of the child who'd said, "Mine." He scanned the yard out of habit, mapping exits, blind spots, and shadows. Doris stepped onto her porch, folding her arms tightly. "Laura Brooks," she called, voice pitched just high enough to carry. "I sure hope you know what you're doing. That animal gets loose. Animal control will hear from me before your front door even shuts." Her eyes never left Ranger, as if watching a ticking clock she didn't trust. Ranger didn't understand the words, but he understood her posture, the stiffness, the way her chin lifted as if bracing for a fight. His ears dropped, head lowering a fraction. He shifted closer to Maddie without thinking. The last time someone had squared their shoulders like that, a command had followed, sharp and loud, and things had gone very wrong. Maddie turned, planting herself between Doris and the dog without quite realizing she'd done it. "He's on a leash," she said, trying for polite. "And he's retired. He won't hurt anyone." She glanced at Ranger, then back up. "But remember my rule. No yelling at him." It came out smaller than it had in the barn, but it was still there. Laura guided them toward the front steps. Ranger paused at the bottom, muscles locking. The doorway framed a dim hallway, the kind of narrow space sound tends to get trapped in. A distant television in Doris's house let out a sudden burst of laughter and a shouted line from a game show, and Ranger flinched, claws scraping wood. For a heartbeat, it seemed like he might bolt, chain or no chain. Maddie felt the tension travel up the leash into her fingers. Instead of pulling, she walked back down to his level, standing beside him on the concrete. "Hey," she murmured, hand brushing his shoulder. "No one's yelling. Just steps, just us. You can take your time." He stood there, breathing shallowly, then deeper. The smells from inside drifted out. Laundry detergent, old coffee in the sink, lemon cleaner, something with cinnamon still hanging in the air from last week's baking. None of it said danger. Slowly, Ranger lifted one paw, set it on the first step, then another, until he crossed the threshold into the small, waiting house. That night, after the tense unpacking of a borrowed dog bed and Laura's quiet phone call to the utility company about extensions, Cedar Lane grew still. Streetlights hummed, a siren wailed faintly far across town, then faded. In Maddie's room, a thin blanket lay on the floor beside her bed, but Ranger didn't lie down until the child did first. He curled near her nightstand, not quite touching the blanket, facing the door. Every creak of the house made his ears twitch. Once a car door slammed outside and his whole body jerked, breath catching, eyes sharp. Before fear could tip into panic, a small hand slid over the edge of the mattress, resting gently on his neck. "No yelling," she whispered into the dark. "You're safe now." For the first time in a very long time, he believed it enough to let his eyes close all the way. Morning light slid across the living room floor in pale stripes, warming the old rug and the scattered crayons Maddie had left out. Ranger lay where he could see both the front door and the hallway to her room. Chin on, his paws watching dust float in the air like slow snow. The house smelled like toast, laundry soap, and the faint trace of Maddie's shampoo. Laura moved quietly in the kitchen, trying not to bang cabinets. She'd already learned that a dropped pan could fold Ranger in on himself like a collapsing tent. When the mail slot clacked, he lifted his head, ears pricked, but stayed where he was. Somewhere outside, a car door closed with a soft thump. He listened harder. A sharp knock came at the front door, 3 quick raps with more authority than a neighbor's visit. Ranger rose halfway, weight balanced on his front legs. He didn't bark, just watched the door, waiting. Maddie's footsteps pattered down the hall, socks sliding slightly on the wood. "I'll get it," she called, voice light. Laura beat her there, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She opened the door a careful inch first, then wider. On the porch stood a woman in a county jacket, clipboard tucked under one arm, and beside her a tall man in a tan deputy's uniform. The woman smiled in a tired, professional way. The man's eyes went straight to Ranger. "Mrs. Brooks?" the woman asked. "I'm Angela Vega with Animal Control. This is Deputy Ryan Callahan. We're just following up about the retired K9 you brought home yesterday." She glanced past Laura into the living room, spotting the broad shape of the dog standing still as a statue behind the coffee table. Doris's curtains twitched next door, then opened fully. She stepped onto her porch with a mug she probably didn't need, watching openly now. "I called them," she said to no one in particular, as if the street had been waiting for her announcement. "Somebody has to make sure things stay safe around here." Her gaze never left Ranger. Ranger felt the shift in the room before anyone spoke his name. His muscles tightened at the sight of the uniform, the radio at the deputy's shoulder, the black metal of the holster at his hip. Old training stirred in him like embers under ash. He stood straighter without thinking, tail low but not tucked, eyes fixed on the doorway. Deputy Callahan stepped inside only after Laura nodded. His boots made soft sounds on the floorboards. "Hey, boy," he said quietly, not reaching out, just letting Ranger see him. There was something in his tone that was different from the others, a kind of respect, worn in like an old jacket. "So, you're the famous Ranger." Ms. Vega flipped through her papers. "The shelter forwarded his file," she explained. "Retired from city duty, noted as skittish, reactive to raised voices. We just need to make sure he's settling in okay. No incidents, no complaints." Her eyes flicked once toward the window, where Doris hovered like a storm cloud. Maddie slipped around the edge of the couch to stand near Ranger's shoulder. Her hand brushed his collar, a light anchor. "There haven't been any incidents," she said. "He slept by my bed. He hasn't even barked." She looked at the deputy. "We have a rule. No one yells at him. Not ever." The words carried more weight in the small room than they had in the barn. Callahan's mouth twitched into something that wasn't quite a smile, but close. He looked from Maddie to Ranger, then back. "That's so," he said. "That's a pretty good rule for most folks, if you ask me." He crouched down slowly, keeping his hands loose at his sides. "Ranger used to work out of our old K9 unit, you know that?" Laura shook her head, fingers tightening on the dish towel. "We were told he was difficult," she said carefully. "We were told he spooked easy, that he wasn't safe in busy places anymore." The words tasted like someone else's judgment, not hers. but she repeated them because that's what had been written down. "Difficult," Callahan repeated softly, like he was trying on a coat that didn't fit. His eyes stayed on Ranger. "He pulled a sergeant out of a warehouse fire 2 years ago. Took a chunk of glass in his side doing it. After that, loud noises started to bother him." He shrugged. "Some folks see that as broken. I don't." Ranger didn't understand the details, but he understood tone and memory. At the word warehouse, an old smell rose up in his mind. Burnt plastic, wet concrete, the copper of blood. His side seemed to throb where the scar lay under his fur, even though no one touched it. His breathing changed, just a little faster, then steadied when Maddie's hand found his neck. Ms. Vega watched the way the big dog leaned into the child's touch instead of away from it. She made a small note on her clipboard. "He's not lunging, not avoiding eye contact," she murmured. "No hackles raised. That's a good sign." She glanced at Maddie. "You understand he needs space when he's scared, right?" Maddie nodded earnestly. "He can hide under my bed if he wants," she said. "Or in the bathroom, or behind the couch. We don't slam doors, and we don't yell." She looked at her mom for confirmation. Laura, after a heartbeat, nodded too. "We're learning to keep it quiet," she said. The words held their own history. Callahan rose slowly, careful not to make any sharp movements. He looked toward the window, where Doris hovered closer, trying to catch any bit of conversation. "I can't tell you what to do about your neighbors," he said to Laura, voice low. "But I can tell you this dog did his time. If a little peace and quiet is all he's asking for now." He let the thought finish itself. On the porch, Doris frowned when she saw Ms. Vega close the clipboard and tuck her pen away. She had expected shaking heads, maybe a truck, not a calm nod, and a half smile from the deputy as he stepped back outside. Inside the Brooks house, Ranger exhaled slowly, a long, shuddering breath that seemed to empty out more than just air, while Maddie kept her hand, resting, steady and warm, right where the old scar ended. Word of the $1 police dog moved down Cedar Lane faster than the mail. By the end of the week, Ranger could feel the way people watched the house differently when they walked past. Footsteps slowed, conversations dipped, and smells of curiosity and worry drifted in through the screen door like another kind of weather. He spent his mornings stretched near the front window, not quite in sight, but close enough to see shadows move on the sidewalk. Some neighbors waved if they caught a glimpse of his ears. Others crossed to the far side of the street, shoes scraping a little quicker on the concrete, as if distance alone could keep trouble from rubbing off on them. Across the driveway, Doris added a second neighborhood watch sign to her front lawn, planting it with more force than necessary. She talked longer and louder on her porch now, mentioning liability and dangerous breeds, always angled just enough that Laura could hear. Ranger didn't know the words, only the way they sharpened the air. On Monday morning, Maddie left for school with her backpack bumping against her shoulders and her lunchbox swinging at her side. Ranger watched from the window, ears tilted forward as she turned at the end of the walk to wave. He pressed his nose to the glass, leaving a soft, foggy circle there until she disappeared around the corner. The day stretched long without her. Laura went to work at the grocery store, the house settling into an uneasy quiet. Somewhere farther down the block, a landscaper's blower roared to life, and Ranger slipped to the hallway, choosing a spot where the sound was muffled, and the smell of Maddie's pillow still lingered faintly in the air. At school, Maddie felt the weight of the story she'd brought home. On the playground, a boy from her class, Tyler, jogged up with wide eyes. "My dad says you live with a crazy police dog now," he blurted. "He said those dogs bite people when they snap." The word snap popped like a firecracker between them. "He's not crazy," Maddie answered, hugging her elbows. "He's retired. He's scared of yelling, that's all." A few kids hovered close enough to listen, their sneakers scuffing the blacktop. One girl whispered that her mom wouldn't let her come over to play anymore. The words stung worse than skinned knees. Back on Cedar Lane that afternoon, Doris hosted a tight little gathering on her porch. 3 neighbors sat in lawn chairs, leaning in while she repeated the same phrases. Former attack dog, no proper yard, little girl in danger. She pointed toward the Brooks house with her coffee mug, like proof sat over there with a leash and a heartbeat. From inside, Ranger heard the low rise and fall of unfamiliar voices, the occasional sharp laugh, the scrape of a chair on wood. He paced once from window to hallway and back, nails clicking softly, reading the IE, tension in the air the way he'd once read the mood in a squad car before a call. His training said, "Be ready." His new life said, "Stay." Late that evening, as shadows stretched across the street, a set of tires rolled by slower than usual. Kyle's old sedan crept past the house, music low, windows down. Ranger smelled them before he saw them, the tang of cheap cologne, fast food salt, and the faint metallic scent of trouble. He watched the car's red taillights fade at the corner, then vanish. Inside the car, Kyle snorted. "That's the place," he told Reese, nodding back over his shoulder. "One kid, one tired mom, one washed-up cop dog. People said she bought him for $1. House like that. Bet they don't have an alarm." Reese smirked, tapping his phone. "We already got the video, man. Next time, maybe we get more." When Maddie finally came home that day, shoulders a little lower than usual, Ranger met her at the door with a soft whine he hadn't made for anyone else. She dropped to her knees and wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face in his fur. He stood perfectly still, letting her hold on until her breathing evened out again. At dinner, Laura noticed the way Maddie hesitated before mentioning her friends. She noticed, too, how Ranger's ears flicked at every raised voice on the street, how he relaxed only when the house settled into its quiet night hum. She reached down under the table, fingers brushing his back once, a silent apology for all the noise the world refused to turn down. Later, when the porch lights winked out one by one up and down the block, Ranger lay near the front door, his body curved toward Maddie's room like a comma at the end of a sentence. Outside, Cedar Lane looked peaceful. Neat yards, sleeping houses, nothing out of place. Inside, a big dog stayed awake a little longer than he needed to, just to make sure the peace stayed put. Night slid over Maple Creek slow and steady, turning Cedar Lane into a row of soft yellow windows floating in the dark. A light rain had started after sunset, tapping gently on the roofs, rinsing the dust from driveways and the day's worries from the air. Inside the Brooks house, everything had that end-of-day quiet that almost feels like a held breath. Laura shrugged on her light jacket by the door, keys jangling softly in her hand. "I won't be late," she told Maddie for the 3rd time, forcing a smile. The grocery store had called. Someone was sick, someone else quit. Overtime meant a little more room between the bills. You know the rules. No stove, no opening the door. Phone stays right by you. Maddie stood beside Ranger, fingers hooked loosely in his collar. "We'll be okay," she said, more bravely than she felt. "Ranger will stay with me." She looked up at her mother. "You remember my rule, too." It wasn't a question. Laura's shoulders eased a little. "No yelling?" she said quietly. "I remember." She pressed a kiss to her daughter's hair and left. The door clicked shut, and the house seemed to exhale. The sound of Laura's car faded down the street. Rain whispered against the window glass. The television hummed low in the corner with some old movie no one was really watching. Maddie curled up on the couch with a blanket, a flashlight, and her favorite book. Ranger lay on the rug at her feet, facing the front door. Across the way, Doris's porch light burned bright, a little lighthouse of disapproval. She watched the Brooks car leave, lips thinning, then pulled out her phone. Through the glass, Ranger could see only her shape, not her expression, but he felt the prickle of being observed. He shifted closer to the couch, easing down where he could feel the warmth of Maddie's bare toes. Time slid by in small, ordinary moments. A commercial break, the soft rustle of pages turning. A clock ticking steady in the hallway. Ranger's breathing fell into that half-resting rhythm of a dog who never truly sleeps. Every creak, every car door in the distance ran through the old filter in his mind. Threat or nothing. Most of it was nothing. Several blocks away, another car moved more slowly than the rest. Kyle's sedan rolled past stop signs without quite stopping, wipers squeaking on a windshield filmed with road grime. Inside, the radio was turned down low, more heartbeat than song. "There," he said, nodding toward Cedar Lane as it appeared ahead. "Last house on the right, lights on, Mom's at work." "Easy." Reese chewed his thumbnail, eyes scanning the row of homes. "What about the dog?" he asked. "You saw the size of that thing." Kyle snorted softly. "That dog's old and washed up. They said he's scared of loud stuff. We're quiet, remember?" He patted the duffel on the floorboard. A crowbar, a pair of gloves, 2 black hoodies that still smelled faintly of plastic. Rain covered the sound of tires as they eased around the corner and parked a street over. The 2 young men slipped out, hoods up, heads low, moving along backyards instead of sidewalks. Ranger didn't hear the car, but when a bird startled from the fence behind the house, wings flapping in sudden alarm, his head lifted sharply, ears tuning to the shift in the night. Maddie's book lay open on her chest now, her eyes heavy. The TV screen flickered soft blues across the ceiling. The rain had picked up, pattering harder against the back patio. Underneath that steady noise, Ranger caught something wrong, the faint scrape of shoes on wet grass, the brush of fabric against the side of the house, the slow metallic test of a back door handle. He rose without a sound, every muscle waking at once. His tail dropped, not from fear but focus. He stepped in front of the couch, placing himself between Maddie and the dark hallway that led to the kitchen and the back door. The smell reached him next. Sweat, cheap body spray, damp cotton, and the flat metal tang of something like a tool. Not Laura, not any neighbor he knew. In the kitchen, the back door knob turned. Once. Twice. Then a harder shake, followed by a muffled curse. A thin bar of light from the stove clock cut across the tile, catching a gloved hand as it slipped a pry bar against the frame. Wood creaked. The old lock protested with a groan that set Ranger's teeth on edge. Maddie stirred on the couch, eyelids fluttering, not yet awake. The door gave way with a soft, ugly crack, letting in a rush of cold, wet air and 2 dark shapes. Kyle stepped in first, shoulders hunched, eyes adjusting to the dim. "Told you," he whispered. "No alarm." Reese followed, closing the door behind them with more care than they'd used opening it. The click seemed small, but in the hushed house it sounded like a shout. Ranger moved. He did not bark. Old training slid over him like a switch being thrown. He flowed down the hallway, nails finding quiet purchase on the worn floor, breath low and measured. At the edge of the kitchen, he paused just long enough to see them fully. 2 intruders. Wrong sense, wrong posture, one reaching for a drawer, another glancing toward the living room. He launched from the shadows like he had 100 times before, back when flashing lights and radio chatter filled his nights. His body hit Reese's legs first, knocking him sideways into the refrigerator with a dull thud. The crowbar clattered across the floor. Kyle spun, arms flying up, but Ranger was already there, teeth clamping down on the thick sleeve of his jacket, driving him backward into the counter. A cry burst out of Kyle, sharp and panicked. It wasn't a shout of rage. It was the sound of someone surprised that the world finally pushed back. Ranger's jaws tightened, careful and precise, fabric bunching between his teeth without breaking skin. He held fast, using his weight to pin Kyle's arm, growl rumbling low in his chest like distant thunder. Maddie jerked awake at the crash, blanket tumbling to the floor. For a heartbeat, she didn't understand what she was hearing. The scrape of bodies, a cupboard door banging, a stranger's voice yelping. Then Ranger's growl rolled down the hallway, and cold fear shot through her small frame. She scrambled off the couch, heart pounding, bare feet hitting the hardwood. At the kitchen doorway, she stopped. Ranger stood between her and the two men, body stretched long and strong, fur bristling along his shoulders. Reese lay on the floor, groaning, hand clutching his hip. Kyle was half bent against the counter, eyes wide, staring at the dog clamped onto his arm. "Get him off me," he hissed. "Make him stop." For a second, the old world and the new one overlapped in Ranger's mind. In another life, a handler's voice would have cut through this moment with a sharp command. "Ouch!" or "Heel!" Now he heard only rain, scrambling footsteps, and the thin, shaking sound of Maddie's breath behind him. He tightened his stance, making himself a wall between her and the intruders. Maddie swallowed hard, throat dry. Every story she'd heard about attack dogs flashed through her mind, but so did every quiet evening on the rug, every flinch at a slammed door, every night he had watched her bedroom doorway until sleep took him. "Ranger," she said, voice soft but clear. "It's okay. I see them. I'm here." Her tone slid into him like warm water over stone. His ears flicked back, catching every note. He did not release his grip, but the wild edge in his eyes eased, replaced by something steadier. He shifted his weight just enough to keep Kyle pinned, but turned his head a fraction, checking on the girl he'd chosen as his new assignment. Out on Cedar Lane, a porch light snapped on farther down the block. A dog 2 houses away began to bark, sharp and confused. Somewhere, a phone was lifted, fingers fumbling over numbers. The night air changed, filling with that nervous electricity that comes when a quiet street realizes it has woken up into a different kind of story. In the Brooks kitchen, the storm inside had already broken. The crowbar lay harmless on the tile. Reese stayed down, hands spread, eyes glued to the big dog holding his friend like a living lock. Maddie edged closer behind Ranger's shoulder, one hand stretching out, not to pull him away, but to touch the place between his shoulders where the fur was warm and damp with effort. "You're okay," she whispered, more for him than for herself. "No one's yelling. You did good." Ranger drew in a long breath, exhaled slowly through his nose, and for the first time since the door had opened, he allowed his body to soften just a little, while still standing guard between the girl with one rule and the world that kept trying to break it. Emp. For a few long seconds after Maddie's whisper, the house held its own heartbeat. Rain ticked against the windows, refrigerator hummed, and 3 different kinds of breathing filled the kitchen. Ranger stayed locked in place, jaws firm on Kyle's sleeve, body a solid barrier. He could taste fabric, sweat, and the metallic tang of fear, but not blood. He hadn't gone that far. The first distant wail of a siren slid into his ears like a ghost from another life. Blue and red light didn't flash yet, but his body remembered it before his mind did. Siren meant movement, meant shouting, meant bright lights and decisions made in seconds. His grip tightened a fraction, not on purpose, legs bracing for a storm that wasn't the weather. Out on Cedar Lane, porch lights flicked on in a ripple. A neighbor down the block stepped outside with a phone still in hand, lips moving as she finished her call to 911. 2 doors away, another dog barked at the rising noise, then fell quiet, sensing something heavier than just teenagers in the dark. The rain eased to a fine mist, as if the sky were listening now, too. Doris stood frozen at her front window, eyes wide, as she watched shapes moving in the Brooks kitchen. She had wanted proof the dog was trouble, a reason to say, "I told you so." Yet, seeing two grown boys on the floor and that big dog planted between them and a small girl, something in her chest twisted. Fear and shame can sound alike when they breathe. The siren grew louder, then cut off right outside, replaced by the crunch of tires and the clank of a car door. Ranger's ears went flat for a heartbeat, old training and old memories colliding. Boot steps pounded up the walk. A sharp knock hit the front door once, then it swung open under a firm hand, and a familiar voice called out, "Police! Ryan Callahan, Maple Creek Sheriff's." Laura appeared behind him almost instantly, hair damp, name tag still pinned crooked on her shirt, eyes wide with a terror that had nothing to do with the rain. She had passed the patrol car on the way home, turned in behind it, stomach dropping. Now she stumbled into the living room and down the hallway, following the sound of her daughter's voice and the low growl she had prayed never to hear directed at a person. Callahan stepped into the doorway fast, then slowed to a careful stop. His flashlight cut through the dim kitchen, landing first on the crowbar, then on Reese, sprawled on the floor, then on Kyle, pinned against the counter. Finally, the beam settled on Ranger, teeth sunk in fabric, eyes bright but not wild, body quivering with contained energy. "Ranger," he said, the name firm but not harsh. He took one step to the side, angling himself so he could see both the dog and the girl behind him. "Easy, boy. I see you. You did your job." The tone was the same one he'd used in the living room weeks before, the one that carried respect instead of command. Laura stopped beside him, one hand flying to her mouth. Maddie looked up at the deputy, eyes shining in the flashlight's spill. "They broke in," she said, voice shaky but clear. "He heard them. He knocked them down, but he didn't. He didn't bite them like in movies." Her hand stayed on Ranger's shoulders, fingers pressed into his damp fur, as if she could keep him from being pulled away just by hanging on. Ranger heard his name in that familiar cadence, and something in him loosened. This was a voice he knew how to answer. Slowly, very slowly, his jaws opened. The torn sleeve slipped free, leaving a deep dent in the fabric, but no red bloom beneath it. He stepped back half a pace, still between Maddie and the intruders, but no longer making contact. His chest rose and fell in heavy, controlled breaths. Kyle sagged against the counter, clutching his arm like it had been broken when all it held was his own panic. "That thing went crazy," he blurted, eyes skittering from Callahan to Laura. "He jumped us for no reason." Reese started to nod, then glanced at the dog, then at the crowbar on the ground, and swallowed the rest of his lie before it made it all the way out. Callahan flicked his light toward the damaged door, the tool on the floor, the wet footprints leading in. His jaw tightened. "You want to try that again?" he asked, voice deepening. "Because from where I'm standing, I see a forced entry, 2 trespassers, and 1 retired K-9 doing exactly what he was trained to do." He clicked off the flashlight, letting the overhead light take over, less harsh, more human. Neighbors had begun to gather on porches now, drawn by the brief flash of patrol lights and the drama hinted at through thin curtains. Doris hovered at the edge of her walkway, arms wrapped around herself against the damp. When another unit rolled up and an officer moved to take statements, she surprised herself by speaking first. "The dog didn't chase them out," she said quietly. "He held them, and when that little girl talked, he listened." Back in the kitchen, one of the younger officers reached instinctively toward the radio on his shoulder, glancing at Ranger with professional caution. "You want me to call animal control, deputy?" he asked. "Just in case?" The suggestion hung there, sharp as barbed wire. Maddie's shoulders stiffened. Laura's spine went straight. Callahan shook his head slowly, eyes never leaving Ranger. The big dog had eased down onto his haunches now, still alert, ears flicking at every new sound, but no longer coiled to strike. "No," the deputy said. "Not tonight. There'll be a report, sure. Maybe a whole lot of paperwork, But this dog isn't a problem. He's the reason those two aren't in Maddie's bedroom right now. Ranger didn't understand the words paperwork or report. He understood the way the room's tension shifted just slightly. The hard edge began to soften. The threat moved away from him and toward the two men now being guided, handcuffed, out the back door. The smell of fear followed them, mixed now with the bitter sting of regret. As the officers led Kyle and Reese out into the damp night, a car from the local paper pulled up at the curb, headlights cutting across the scene. A young reporter stepped out, camera hanging from her neck, eyes sharp with a different kind of attention. Ranger watched from the kitchen, head tilted, as flashbulbs caught Maddie's small figure beside him, her hand still resting, quiet and firm, on the dog who had just proven that a $1 life could still be worth more than anyone expected. If this story touched you, drop a quick comment below. Even just a 0 or 1 helps more than you think. Your small interaction keeps these true-hearted stories alive. And if you want to follow more journeys like this one, make sure to subscribe to the channel. The next story is already on its way, and you won't want to miss it.